Peter has delivered to the crowd in response to the healing of the man who has been lame since his birth, 40 years. And I'm focusing on the last time we talked, we were looking at the indictment, the fourfold indictment that Peter delivered to the people, showing that they were guilty of the blood of Jesus Christ. And I want to go back and look at that again, and then just want to show what I wanted to do this week. I did a little research, and I wanted to delve into the jurisprudence of the Old Testament Jewish nation in order to really show the magnitude of the sin that these people were guilty of in the way they treated Christ and put him to death. It's very interesting. Now, there are people about who try to tell us, and even our great illustrious prior president, Obama, when he was in the presence of Muslims, would say, we are not a Christian nation. He's full of baloney. I mean, every document of the Founding Fathers, every writing of the Founding Fathers, whether you look at the Federalist Papers or, all those, I mean, they implore the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob continually. So, what I find interesting as I went through this, as we go through the jurisprudence of the Jews, you're going to see things, you're going to say, hey, that's familiar to me. I'm familiar with that. That seems familiar to me, because our own jurisprudence system is drawn almost straight out of the Scriptures, with some variations, but I just want to show that every precept and every legal doctrine that the Jews tried to operate under, they took them all when it came to getting rid of Christ. They hated him so much, they took it all and threw it out the window. And what they did was just, even if Christ had not been the Son of God, what they did was just such an utter crime of what they did to an innocent person. So, and that's where I want to go today, is just to show, based on the Jews' understanding of justice, how they were really, they're guilty of the blood of Christ. So, first of all, Peter declares to them in Acts 3:12 down through about 16. He tells them, first of all, that they were guilty because they denied the very Messiah, Jesus, who God himself had glorified. They denied him. Secondly, they were guilty because they had delivered God's Messiah, the chosen one, to Gentile rulers to be killed, even though Pilate was determined to let him go. You go through all the Gospels make mention of this. In Luke 23:4, Pilate says, I find no fault in this man. And Luke 23:14-16, he says, no, nor yet Herod, for I sent you to him, and lo, nothing worthy of death is done unto him. And in John 18:38, Pilate again declares, I find in him no fault at all. John 19:4, I bring him forth to you that ye may know that I find no fault in him. John 19:6, take ye him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. In John 19:12, from thenceforth Pilate sought to release him. So this Gentile ruler, he sees nothing in Christ worthy of death. He wanted to let him go, but he wasn't as strong a leader as we thought he was. He had a Roman legion at his disposal. He could have let this man go and backed it up with force if he had wanted to. But the Jewish leaders manipulated him and basically threatened to turn him into Caesar, being Caesar's friend if they let this man go. So he caved. So to political pressure, he decided he would have this innocent man put to death. The third indictment was that they desired that a murderer be released among them rather than the holy and just one, Jesus Christ. They wanted Barabbas. Barabbas was a murderer who was put in prison for sedition, robbery, and murder. So how foolish is this? You have somebody known to be a murderer, and you say, we'd rather have him among us than have Jesus Christ among us. We want the murderer among us. And the Bible and historical records do not tell us the life of Barabbas after this event, but who knows? In my opinion, once a murderer, always a murderer. You'd have no idea the trouble he caused after he was released. He also declares that they were guilty of killing the Prince of Life, whom God had raised up. He was the Prince of Life. He was the one they had seen him. Many members of the Sanhedrin, they were there. The Pharisees were there when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. They were there many of them were there when they saw him raising people from the dead. He is the Prince of Life. But they decided to kill it. And then, in order to underscore their guiltiness, Peter declares to them, it is in the name of this man who you killed, who God raised up, that this man is healed. It's in faith in him, this man that you wanted dead, he is now raised, which proves that he was the Son of God, and he now is still alive with all the power, and even more so than he had in this life. And basically what he's telling them, that what they did, the act they committed, was the ultimate act of wickedness in putting Christ to death. If we go down to verse 13 in chapter 3, it says, the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob, the God of our fathers, hath glorified his Son, Jesus. I wanted to go back and look at the promise that God had given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And in doing this, I had what I think might be perhaps a minor epiphany, a realization of something that I hadn't seen before. But we'll get to that in a moment. But first of all, in Abraham, or to Abraham, in Genesis 22:18, God promises to Abraham, after he had gone up to Mount Moriah with Isaac and was prepared to slay him at the command of Christ, of God, but God stopped him. And Abraham, or God says to Abraham, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. And then to Isaac, the same promise. And I will make, in Genesis 26:3-4, and I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heavens, and I'll give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. And then he reiterated the promise again to Jacob in Genesis 28:13-14, and again he tells him, in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So we recognize and accept that, or as I saw this, I saw both a particular prophecy and a general. The particular prophecy was that the nations of the earth will be blessed in Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the one who is going to come and offer salvation to Jew and Gentile alike. And as we've studied on Sunday evenings, that proto-evangelium that we talked about, the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. This is Jesus Christ. This is a particular prophecy that Jesus Christ is going to be the seed of Abraham, in who all the families of the earth would be blessed. But I saw, as I studied this, I saw this a general application as well. I see a general application. The Jewish people provided a Judeo-Christian underpinning really to much of Western civilization. And we benefit, I think, as a society from the Jewish people. They have brought things that when we say that we are founded on a Judeo-Christian ethic, it means something to us. We have this group of people who God made his own special choice, his own special people. When they were following the Lord, they sought above all else to be a just people. They sought justice more than anything else. And I think as a result of their culture and the things that they have brought down to us, they have been a blessing to us generally. They've been a blessing to culture and to civilizations in a general way, as their way of doing things have found their way into our own society. And we take, for example, the Jewish ritual of circumcision. Most American males have undergone this as children. Modern medicine shows us or tells us that it's a healthy practice for both the man and the woman. It is something that helps to produce greater health, and I think it's not a accident that the Jewish people, after they instituted this ordinance, they flourished. Their numbers grew really rather rapidly, and I've read some commentators that say that this act of, or this ordinance of circumcision provided a certain amount of cleanliness that allowed for a rapid propagation of the Jewish people. Now, we're going to talk about, I think, what I want to talk about is Old Testament Jewish jurisprudence and what was practiced at the time of Christ and its foundations. If you go to Deuteronomy 16:18-20, we will find, first of all, that the Lord commands the Israelites, judges and officers shalt thou make thee in all thy gates, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, throughout thy tribes, and they shall judge the people with just judgment. Thou shalt not wrest judgment. Thou shalt not respect persons, neither take a gift, for a gift doth blind the eyes of the wise and pervert the words of the righteous. That which is altogether just shalt thou follow. Thou mayest live and inherit the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Leviticus 19:15, you shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. Thou shalt not respect the person of the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty, but in righteousness shalt thou judge thy neighbor. Proverbs 21:15. It is joy to the just to do judgment. And I think when you see judgment, you can interchange it with justice. But it is joy to do just, or it is joy to the just to do justice or judgment, but destruction shall be to the workers of iniquity. And Micah 6:8. He hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. So this is the underpinning, I believe, for the Jewish system of jurisprudence, their way of pursuing justice. And this was in place at the time of Christ. Now, what God did, he gave the basic understanding of what he wanted them to do, but I think they were free to carry it out in a practical way in order to follow the precept God had given them. So we'll see how what they did in order to ensure that they were executing justice. And again, what we're looking at here is their idea of justice as opposed to the way they actually treated Christ when he stood before them. They violated every rule of justice because they were so intent upon destroying him. The Jews were allowed, for those cities that had less than 100 families in them, there usually were 3 judges there for deciding civil matters. For cities with more than 100 families in them, they would have 23 judges, and then they had the Great Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, which consisted of 70, plus the high priest, which made 71. They always had an odd number of judges so that you would never have a split verdict on someone. You would always have either an acquittal or a conviction. There would never be a split down the middle. Qualifications for judges, according to the Judeo system, is that a judge must have been at least 40 years of age. So he had to have a little bit of experience, a little bit of wisdom. They also required that a judge hold at least 3 offices of gradually increasing dignity. That would mean he could start out at a small city as a judge. He could move up to a larger city and serve there as a judge. And then if he met the qualifications, he could move up to the Great Sanhedrin, where he could be a judge there as well. He must be held in high esteem by others, and he must possess impeccable integrity, must be beyond reproach. And we find that at the time of Christ, this was not necessarily the case. The high priests and the judges at that time were terribly corrupt. The Sanhedrin, they were sort of the supreme court of the land. The Sanhedrin, they were the only court that was authorized and had jurisdiction over capital offenses. If a man's life was in jeopardy, then it would move on up to the Great Sanhedrin. That's where his case would be heard. In the Sanhedrin, the judges, or the rulers there, served as both judges and jurors. The Sanhedrin was prohibited from bringing charges themselves. They only acted on charges that were brought by someone else, by 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses into the case. And we see that with Christ, this was violated. The Sanhedrin themselves tried to come up with charges they could lay on Christ in order to put him to death. The guilt or innocence of accused, theoretically, was only based on evidence that was presented in the court. And any member of the Sanhedrin who had a personal interest in or knowledge of the accused or the charges must have disqualified himself. We saw it with Christ, Annas and Caiaphas. I mean, they had previously stated they wanted to get rid of Jesus. They had a personal interest in removing Christ because he was a threat to them. They should have disqualified themselves and had nothing to do with this trial. But not only did they not disqualify themselves, but they were the ringleaders in bringing these charges against Christ. Under rabbinical law, the Sanhedrin is also charged with the duty of protecting and defending the accused. If you were someone who was charged with a capital offense under the Jewish system, you actually were a very fortunate person, because the standard that the Jews had to prove in order to put you to death was extraordinarily high. And one of the things was that the Sanhedrin was charged with protecting and defending the accused to the best of their ability. Although no member of the Sanhedrin could act as an accuser or a prosecutor in a capital case, the witnesses were the ones who did this. So, what kind of rights did they afford those who came before them? First of all, under Jewish jurisprudence, an accused individual had the right to employ counsel. He could have somebody there to defend himself. And if there's no one there to defend himself, then at least one member of the Sanhedrin was supposed to step forward and act as the man's defender and his spokesman. And we see this comes down to us in our own society, where a defendant has the right to have an attorney present, even if the state has to pay for it. They also insisted that an accused could not be compelled to testify against himself. And we have this same thing. It's in the Fifth Amendment of our Constitution. According to Jewish jurisprudence, only one witness was as good as no witness. Only in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses was a charge, could a charge be brought and result in a conviction. They also state that a voluntary confession on the part of the accused was not accepted by the Sanhedrin. So a guy could come in and say, I killed so-and-so. Well, they would not accept that. They would not accept it unless there were 2 or 3 other witnesses that could corroborate what he had confessed to. They could not condemn someone to death based solely on their own voluntary confession. They did not permit hearsay evidence, which we do not as well. And they did have the 2-witness requirement. A person could not be condemned on the word of one individual. In Deuteronomy 17:6, at the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death, but at the mouth of 1 witness he shall not be put to death. The requirements for being a witness were very stringent under the Jewish jurisprudence. First, the witness had to be a competent, independent, and unrelated to the accused, and all witnesses must agree on all the essentials of the crime. And they also must agree in the substance of their testimony. They would be questioned as to the time, the date, and the place in which the event was supposed to have occurred. They would be asked, if someone came forward as a witness and brought a charge against somebody, they would ask them, in what cycle of 7 years did this event take place? Then they would ask, in what year of the 7-year cycle, in what month of that year, in what day of that year, at what hour of the day, and then in what place. And then they had to agree upon the mode. If they agreed on everything, but one witness said he killed him with a spear, another one said he killed him with a sword, their testimony would be disqualified and they would not be allowed to stand because they disagreed on the mode of the death. So, their list of requirements for being a witness, for those who could not be a witness, was rather interesting. Women could not serve as witnesses, slaves could not serve as witnesses, minors, demented persons, those who are deaf, mute, and blind for obvious reasons, tax collectors, farmers, the illiterate, and no one with a personal interest in the accused. They were not allowed to be witnesses. So the standard for being a witness was very high. They also said that circumstantial evidence, no matter how convincing or compelling, was not allowed. Now, what's that mean? If I had a beef against Aaron here, the most mild-mannered guy here, I think, in our group. Now, if I had a beef against Aaron, and Aaron was standing behind that door right there, and you all knew he was back there, and if I took a sword and shoved it through the door and into Aaron's heart, and pulled it out, you heard Aaron scream, you heard him fall to the ground, you see me standing there with the bloody sword, you open the door, and there's Aaron lying dead.
Think he'd really scream?
He might, I don't know. We'd see. Maybe not. The fact is, if you were to say you saw me shove the sword through the door, you open the door and there is Aaron lying dead and I'm holding the bloody sword in my hand, they would not accept that. They would say it's not direct. Even if the evidence, circumstantial evidence is compelling, you cannot say that you actually saw the sword go into Aaron's heart. You saw it go into the door, you heard Aaron scream, you heard Aaron fall to the floor, you saw him lying there in a pool of blood and you saw the sword with his blood on it. But that would not be enough to convict me because you didn't actually see the sword go into Aaron's heart. So circumstantial evidence, no matter how convincing, was not allowed. Which, again, the bar for condemning someone was very, very high. And if you were an accused murderer, you would want to appear before a Jewish court, because your chances of getting off would be much higher than they would be in any other society. Now, as far as procedure, and this was a violation again with Christ, no hearing could begin on a day prior to the Sabbath or prior to a holy day, because there was a 3-day rule that had to be followed, and they did not do this with Christ. When they arrested Christ at night, brought him into the house of Annas first, and then Caiaphas, and then to Pilate. Probably within a matter of about 9 hours from the time he's arrested, he's on the cross. I mean, it's a very short period of time. Jewish law required, first of all, no trials at night. And they did that to Christ. They began him early in the morning. They took him into the house of Annas, then Caiaphas, and then early in the morning to Pilate. The trial was illegal because it began at night. It was illegal because it began the day before the Sabbath. They were not allowed to, a case was supposed to occur only during the daytime. Then after the Sanhedrin had judged a person, they were given a full day to consider their vote that they cast on the person. They were supposed to go home. They were supposed to fast. They were to engage in no business, no personal stuff. They were supposed to spend the whole day reflecting on the vote they cast in regard to the case they heard yesterday. Then they would come back again on the third day. They would be given a chance to recast their vote again. And then on the evening of the third day, if the conviction still stood, then the person would be executed. But there's a 3-day rule they had to follow, and they did not follow it with Christ. Like I said, nobody, we don't know for sure what time of the night Christ was arrested, but let's say it's 2 o'clock in the morning. By 9 o'clock, he's on the cross. That rule was thrown out the window in regard to Christ. So, an accused individual always enjoyed the presumption of innocence. Even after the vote to convict them was cast on the first day, until the third day they came back and reaffirmed their vote, he was still considered to be innocent until the verdict was announced. The accused had to be tried during the daytime. He also had to be tried in public. We see that Jesus Christ was not tried. They violated this. They took Christ and tried him privately in the house of Annas and then Caiaphas. They did it at night under darkness. And according to Jewish jurisprudence, also an accused could only be tried in one place, and that was the hall of judgment. And again, they violated this with Christ. They took him to the private home of Annas and Caiaphas, and they again violated their own rules. No evidence could be introduced except in the presence of the accused. Now, you recall when they arrested Christ and they took him in, they had no charges against him yet. There were no charges. Therefore, the arrest itself was illegal, even according to Jewish law. They arrested him. I mean, the Sanhedrin, they wanted him dead. But they were going to arrest him first, and they will come up with a reason to justify his death later. But there were no charges against Christ, and even when they brought him before Annas and Caiaphas, they could not get any witnesses to agree to what they were going to charge him with. They ended up coming up with their own charge, which was contrary to Jewish law. The Sanhedrin was not the one that was supposed to initiate charges. But what did they do? They asked him, I adjure you by the living God, are you the Son of God? And Christ basically says, I am. We have no further need of witnesses. We condemn the man. Well, that was against Jewish law. The Sanhedrin is not supposed to initiate charges against anyone. What they do is they hear the evidence brought by someone else, and they judge the evidence, and based on the evidence, they judge whether or not the person brought before them is worthy of death. Now, in Jewish law, I know I've been to court many times, and before you step up into the witness stand to testify, you only put your hand in the Bible, you raise your other hand, and you swear by God that you are going to give the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The Jews did not do that. They didn't believe it was necessary because they felt that the commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness, was sufficient to deter perjury. Besides, other things were put in place to also deter perjury. Any witness perjuring himself in a capital crime would be subject to the death penalty himself if he was found to have used perjurious testimony to try to cause somebody else to be put to death. And if he was found to have perjured himself, he himself would be put to death. And this is based in Deuteronomy 19:16-20. If a false witness rises up against any man to testify against him that which is wrong, then both the men between whom the controversy is shall stand before the Lord and before the priests and the judges, which shall be in those days. And the judges shall make diligent inquisition. And behold, if the witness be a false witness, and hath testified falsely against his brother, then shall ye do unto him as he thought to have done unto his brother. So thou shalt put evil away from among you. So that was another deterrent to perjury. If I tried to perjure and bring a false accusation against somebody, if I was discovered to have perjured myself, what I sought to have done to Aaron, I myself would suffer if I was found to have lied about it. And another deterrent to perjury was, if an accused were condemned, the witnesses were required to be the first ones to cast the stone on the accused. Deuteronomy 17:7, the hands of the witnesses shall be first upon him to be put to death, and afterward the hands of all the people, so that the evil from among you, or so thou shalt put the evil away from among you. So a man is brought before the Sanhedrin. They have a hearing. The witnesses are brought in. The witnesses give their testimonies. At the end of all of this, then, at the end of the hearing, there is a summation of the evidence to be given by one of the judges, one of the members of the Sanhedrin. And then they require all the spectators to be removed from the courtroom. And the judges would sit in a semicircle, and they would have on one end of the semicircle a scribe, and on the other end another scribe. And then they would start with the youngest member first, working their way up, so that the youngest ones would not be influenced by the older members. And they would each cast a ballot, convict or acquit, convict or acquit. And they'd also be allowed the opportunity to explain their vote, why they were voting this in a particular way. And the scribes one scribe would record all the convicts, another one would record all the acquits, and they'd go down the route, go down the group like that. They also had a group of men who would sit at the feet of the elders, who were called auditors. They were there to monitor the hearing and to ensure that everything was done according to the law. So the Jews, I think, more than anything else, they were afraid. They were definitely afraid of falsely putting somebody to death who may have been innocent. So they bent over backwards to make sure an innocent person was not put to death. I found this to be sort of interesting as we go down this list. All that was required to convict somebody was a simple majority. You had 71, you could have, 41 and 39, or however the number was. If there was one more sufficient to convict, the man was convicted. If the vote was to acquit, the trial was immediately over and the accused was free to go. He could not be retried. There were no appeals or anything of that nature. If the majority voted to convict, no announcement of the verdict was rendered that day. They would then take the one day off. Every member would go home. They would fast. They would devote themselves to reflecting on their vote, reviewing the evidence, reviewing the testimony, and then they would come back after a full day, and they would reconvene again, and then they would vote again. And during this time, the accused is still presumed to be innocent. So when they reconvene, they take a new ballot. Any judge previously voting to acquit could not change his vote to convict. His vote to acquit was set in stone. He could not change it. However, a judge who previously voted to convict could change his vote to acquit and provide his reasoning as to why he went the one way the first time and why he's changing it this time. So again, it's stacked in favor of the defendant. And this was interesting as well. I saw this as very interesting. They said that a unanimous vote to acquit actually was taken as invalid and resulted in acquittal. Did I say convict? A unanimous vote to convict was taken as invalid and resulted in an acquittal. Under Mosaic rabbinical law, at least one member of the Sanhedrin was required to interpose and act as a defender of the accused. A unanimous vote indicated by itself that a conspiracy had occurred and there was nobody standing as a defender or a friend of the accused. So the accused was automatically acquitted in the case of a unanimous vote to convict. Huh? Say again? It does seem a little crazy, but still, it's, There has to be somebody. It has to be shown that he had somebody who was his friend during the trial. And if he had no defender, and think of Christ. Did anybody stand up to defend Christ? Nobody did. And when Christ was when they voted on Christ, they didn't vote one at a time. They voted by acclamation, didn't they? They said, "What think ye?" And everybody shouted, "He's worthy of death." They didn't follow that procedure, one vote at a time, starting with the youngest, working to the most senior. And I think by looking at this and the way Christ's trial played out, we can assume certain men were not there, because they would have probably stood up and defended Christ. Let's say Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus, and the whole point of this late night trial was to get Christ on the cross before anybody else knew what was going on. They wanted to get him dead and done with before the crowd knew, before those members of the Sanhedrin who might have been his defenders knew. I have a feeling that Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, and if there were any others disposed in a kindly way toward Christ, they had no idea this was going to happen. So this was all done under darkness. And like Satan, or like Christ said, this is your hour. This is Satan's hour. And Satan worked everything he could to put Christ on the cross. And finally, and I'm really short on time, but once a person was convicted and sentenced to death, the procedure was that a member of the court would stand in the doorway to the court with a flag. And then 2 members of the Sanhedrin, the witnesses, the accused, and another officer of the court would proceed out to the place of execution. One of them would be on a horse. The officer of the court on the horse would also have a flag. And then there would be a herald as well. And as they're going out to the place of execution, they would say something to the effect, "John Doe is to be executed for murder. John Schmo and Bill Schmo are witnesses to the crime committed at such and such a place, at such and such a time. If any can urge anything against the accused, go to the Sanhedrin now sitting and state your argument." If that were to occur, they'd wave the flags, the procession to the place of execution would end, they'd go back, and they'd have another hearing based on anybody who came forward to defend the accused. And also, on the way to the place of execution, if the accused happened to think of something he wished he had said, but he hadn't said, they would stop and they'd go back and he'd have a chance to re-argue his case in front of the Sanhedrin. He could do this as many as 5 times. So it could take a long time to finally get the guy to the place of execution. But once he was at the place of execution, within 4 yards of execution, they would administer to him a mixture of a stupefying drink, which I believe was frankincense and either wine or vinegar. It was to render him insensible so that the pain of the execution would not be so great. So they're still trying to show mercy to this man who is going to his place of execution. And when we come back, I want to go down through Christ's trial and how every one of these precepts was violated, and how the indictments of Peter against these people, I mean, if you read back behind the line, it's a very serious indictment of what they had done to Christ. And so are there any questions or comments on what we've looked at so far?